Thank you for allowing me to give you a few words of my experience today. My name is Abigail. I live in Silverton, Oregon. My daughter, Catherine, was murdered when she was 19 years old. That was in 1980. That seems like a long time, and it was a long time ago, but it's still just like yesterday. When Catherine died, I was in a state of such disbelief and denial that I am surprised when I look back now that I survived that time. I was so full of anger and so full of rage and so unable to deal with not only Catherine's death, but my regular day-by-day life. The district attorney came to me and he said, "We're going to find the person that did this. We're going to put him on trial. We're going to get a guilty plea and we're going to get a guilty sentence and we're going to put him on death row and we're going to execute him. And when he's executed, everything will be all right again." And I can tell you that when your child has been murdered, you go into a state of temporary insanity. And it was because of that that I believed him. I truly believed him. The other thing I learned was that families of murder victims are very isolated. Nobody wants to talk to you. Nobody has anything helpful to say. And so he was the one person that I could pick up the phone and call and that he would talk to me. So I believed him. I lived in that state of anger and rage for 12 long years. And that's a terrible waste of a life. Actually, at the time, I think if you'd known me or been one of the people around me, you wouldn't have known that I was in that anger and rage because I kept it so closed in. But there were some times when I would have to cry. And what I would do is I would get in the shower and I would turn it on full blast and I would just stand there and scream to let out some of that negative energy. And after 12 years, I started on a journey that I didn't do on purpose. It just happened that the right people, the right places, the right books, the right teachings all came into my hands at a time when I was able to really use them and really take what they said and use it in my own life. So I was living in Santa Rosa and I was taking a class at a local building group. It was a group I was meeting with, and we were talking about forgiveness. And I said, "You've got to be crazy. You think I should forgive the man that murdered my daughter? There is no way I could do that." And the whole class ended up just in chaos. And one of the girls was crying, and the poor person, our teacher, had to get everybody calmed down. But it was like a little seed had been planted, this tiny little seed, and you never know when the seeds are going to bloom. Because they tell us that the longest journey we take in this lifetime is the one that goes from our head to our heart. And I'd been living in my head all these years, and it was time that I finally got into my heart. Anyway, on the way home from that meeting, I was driving, and actually I know exactly where I was. I was driving past the Santa Rosa Junior College, and I heard this voice, and it said to me, "You must forgive him, and you must let him know." And that voice was so loud and so persuasive that it didn't let me sleep that night. It had me out of bed at 4 o'clock in the morning, typing a letter to the man who murdered my daughter. And I'm going to read you just a couple paragraphs of that so you get the feeling of what this was like. And all I said was, 12 years ago, I had a beautiful daughter named Catherine. She was a young woman of unusual talents and intelligence, and she radiated love and joy. 2 months after her 19th birthday, Catherine left her earthly body, and her spirit transitioned to her next stage of life. I know that Catherine is in a better place than we can ever know here on earth, but I did not know that when Catherine died. I knew I'd been robbed of my precious child, and that she'd been robbed in growing into womanhood and achieving all her potential. The violent way she left this earth was impossible for me to understand. I was saddened beyond belief, and indeed my loss of Catherine, it became the point of reference for all family history as having happened either before or after Catherine died. I was very angry with you and wanted to see you punished to the limit of the law. You had done irreparable damage to my family and my future. And at the end, I just said that, I hope this letter will help you to face the future. There's only love and goodness in this world, regardless of things may seem to you now. I'm willing to write to you or visit you. I send my blessings to you and your children. And I just signed it, Gail, mother of Catherine. Now, it's one thing to write a letter, and it's another thing to mail it. When it goes in the mailbox, that's what makes it real. And so I took it to my group the following week, and I read them the letter. And they got up as a group, and they circled around and around me and just poured love into me. And it's with their love and their energy that I was able to actually mail the letter. And I can still hear the little click that was on the mailbox when I mailed that letter. I still get shivers when I think about hearing that click. Because when that mailbox clicked, all the anger, all the rage, all the ugliness I'd carried in my body for 12 long years was instantly gone. And in its place, I was filled with these feelings of love and joy and inner peace. I was truly in a state of grace simply from offering forgiveness to another human being. And it would have been all right if I'd never heard from him, because I'd had the healing that I'd needed all those years. But I did hear back from him. And his letter was a surprise to me because he was obviously very intelligent, very spiritual, and so remorseful. He expresses his remorse over and over again in the letter, and he invites me to visit him. So I filled out the paperwork, and I sent it into the state of California. It took 90 days for them to decide that I would not be a danger to the prison or the prisoners or whatever they were looking for. And several people said, "You can't do this alone. I'll go with you." And the day came for me to go to visit, and everybody else was busy that day, and so I went alone. So this has been truly a journey I've done all by myself. I don't know how I got there because my knees were shaking, and I've never been so frightened. It was the most frightening day of my life, but I finally got to San Quentin prison. Didn't know where to park the car, didn't know what door to go in, didn't know how to get in. Very complicated process to get in to visit someone on death row. I finally got through it. Everyone was very helpful. And I walked in to the visiting room. At that time, there was just rows of chairs. And I went in and I looked. And I was expecting to see a room full of monsters because that's what everybody had told me. I knew that everyone on death row was a monster. And I looked around that room, and I didn't see a single monster. All I saw were perfectly normal-looking men. They're all dressed in jeans and blue chambray shirts, quietly visiting with their visitors. And I waited, and finally Douglas came down, and he came up to me. And I'd never seen him before. He'd never seen me before. The guard had to point me out to him. And he said, "You do me the greatest honor by visiting me today." And we sat there together, and we talked about Catherine. And we talked about his mother who had committed suicide when he was 16. We talked about his brother who committed suicide when he was 22. We talked about his father who had died after he was arrested and in prison. We talked about both of our losses, and we cried. We cried together. And he wasn't the least bit embarrassed to openly weep in front of that room full of other prisoners. And men in prison don't cry. They don't weep because it's shown as a great sign of weakness. And he didn't care. And I walked out of that visiting room after one visit. And I knew that I would spend the rest of my life, if that's what it took, to help abolish the death penalty. Not just for the men in San Quentin on death row, but there are men and women in death rows all over this earth. And that's why I'm making this video for you today, so that you can see that murder victim family members do not need to have someone executed in order to have closure. I believe closure is a myth. And I want to give you my definition of what an execution is. An execution is a state-sanctioned, premeditated murder. And murder is wrong. Murder is wrong whether it happens in the street, in the home, in the school, or in a prison. Is the ultimate violation of a human's rights. And thank you for listening to me today.